was an isolated place for pharaohs to be buried, and it was deliberately chosen, as you know, by almost all of the pharaohs from the New Kingdom because they thought they could more easily protect their tombs from grave robbers. And there are at least 63 tombs here. Jeremy actually put the count as higher. Virtually all of them were looted in antiquity. Still, people kept looking for treasure. And in 1906, a British Egyptologist found this cup buried 10 feet underground. It had this name in hieroglyphics. Excavators continued to look for his tomb until 1914, when they abandoned the search and they were convinced that there was nothing left to be found. But Carter disagreed. The area that Carter had in mind was piled high with rubble that had been excavated when the tomb of Ramesses VI, who lived about 200 years after Tutankhamun, had been dug. Carter had just started clearing it out when World War I broke out. During the war, Carter worked as a diplomatic courier in the Middle East. And when he could get leave, he visited the valley, but it wasn't until after the war in 1918 that the work really truly began. By the summer of 1922, Carter was called back to England to talk to Lord Carnarvon about the future of this dig. By this time, their partnership had lasted 15 years, and they didn't have a lot to show for it. Lord Carnarvon did have a collection of ancient Egyptian art, which was kept in his grand house in England, but Carnarvon had spent 20,000 pounds. That's well over $500,000 on these excavations. So he didn't want to spend any more. Carter begged him to finance one last season. And Carter said, if, after this final season, if Tut's tomb was not found, then he would pay for the work himself. Lord Carnarvon's house may be recognizable to you. That's it, I could hear you say it. Yes, it's where Downton Abbey was filmed. Carter got to work on November 1st, working in a small area near Ramesses VI's tomb. His workmen started clearing the remains of some ancient huts that he had abandoned a few seasons before. He had no other choice. There was no place else to work. 3 days later, on November 4th, underneath the first hut that had been removed, a stone step was discovered. But was this the entrance to the tomb? More digging uncovered an entire staircase. When that was uncovered, the top of a doorway came into view. It was covered with ancient seals, but these seals gave no hint of who might be buried inside. Before going any further, Carter ordered the staircase to be filled in again, and then he sent a telegram to Lord Carnarvon urging him to get to Egypt as soon as possible. Carter agonized, waiting 20 days for him to arrive. On November 24th, Carnarvon arrived and his daughter, Lady Evelyn, and the steps into the tomb were cleared again. Workers dug out the whole staircase. Eventually, they could see 16 steps and an entire doorway. When the door was completely uncovered, Carter was finally able to read more of the seals and find a name: Tutankhamun. So after years of searching, he had finally found the tomb. But what was inside? Carter could see that the door had been repaired in 2 places. This meant that the door had been broken into and resealed at least twice. To find out what was behind the doorway, Carter and his team dug out the rough stones that blocked it and discovered the space behind the door was a descending corridor filled from floor to ceiling with limestone chippings. The workmen set to work to clear it, but no machinery could be used to clear this rubble. Each basket of rubble had to be carried up the steps and dumped outside. And then the rubble had to be carefully sorted so that any object they found could be saved. Carter found jars, vases, clay seals, and jewelry. And these objects were probably dropped by the tomb robbers as they made a hasty escape. After digging for about 30 feet, they came to a second sealed doorway and broke it open. Carter struck a rod through the second sealed doorway, but he felt nothing. He widened the hole. He lit a candle, and then he peered in. There was already an electric supply to the valley. There was electricity, so they could light the corridor. So why did Carter use a candle when he first looked into the tomb? He was carrying out an old-fashioned test for bad air. Inert gases would put the candle out, though flammable ones might explode. Lord Carnarvon and Lady Evelyn could barely stand the suspense as Carter looked through the hole. Carnarvon asked, "Can you see anything?" It was all Carter could do to get out the words. "Yes, wonderful things." Carter widened the hole in the door and pushed through an electric cord. He said, "At first I could see nothing, but presently, as my eyes grew accustomed to the light, details of the room within emerged slowly from the mist. Strange animals, statues, and gold. Everywhere, the glint of gold." By noon on November 27th, the sealed door was demolished. Carter's groups entered the room. They had to step over this white lotus chalice, there it is, which stood on the threshold. And they quickly looked for a tomb, and when they found none, they realized that this was just an outer room and that the king's real burial place must be somewhere else. Carter called this room the antechamber, and it's the biggest room in the tomb. Carter and his team were amazed by the number of treasures that it contained. 3 gilded animal-shaped couches dominated the room, and everything else was heaped over, under, or around them. That included caskets, boxes, vases, and beautifully carved thrones, chairs, and stools. In one corner, a heap of wheels and gilded frames turned out to be the tangled parts of several royal chariots. The leather harnesses of the chariots had disintegrated into a gluey mass. It dripped over their wheels, axles, and frames. Many of these artifacts were familiar to archaeologists who had seen pictures or illustrations in tomb paintings, but they had never seen the real, actual examples before. Luxury items were interspersed with ordinary, everyday objects. Things like the royal underwear, a bronze razor, board